Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political. Hey everyone, I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms.
Here we have Zuckerberg laying out some history. Some of this stuff is clearly self-serving, talking about his commitment to free speech, which clearly was not the case just recently. Could you please help this channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing? The fact is, in the Biden years, Zuckerberg was not strong on these free speech principles. Indeed, he went along with government diktats. He admits that the systems put in place made mistakes. No kidding. I know many people who had really innocuous posts that simply ran against the left ideology that resulted in bans of varying time periods. He also talks about a political shift on the issue of free speech. This should never have been a consideration. Free speech is enshrined in the Constitution and should be non-negotiable regardless to the position of political overlords. Giving in to bully government's diktats that go against free speech is the road to tyranny, as we've seen far too much of over the last few years. But let's at least give Zuckerberg some credit here, in at least latterly coming to the realization, particularly given that he started speaking about this with a strong communication just after the Democrat convention, where it looked like Kamala Harris was getting a bit of a run-on in the polls.
Specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote non-stop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system.
So Zuckerberg is following X's example of getting rid of fact checkers and going to community notes. There is the extraordinary admission that the fact checkers were too politically biased. Why has it taken him such an inordinately long time to recognize this? I mean, Facebook banned Trump from Facebook, but not a whole bunch of terrorist leaders also not being banned from Facebook. That should have been a screaming red flag on the issue of political bias. But clearly, at the time, Zuckerberg himself was part of this bias.
Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms.
Facebook is getting rid of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender. He says it goes against the current mainstream discourse. Once again, this should never have been an issue. For example, being pro-slavery and pro-racist policies were once mainstream values. As such, using what were the previous Facebook systems that were in place, discussions that were against slavery or racism would have been either banned or they would have been pushed down very low in terms of priority. The platforms have a special dispensation as far as defamation and the like are concerned, because they're platforms. The fact is, they tried to have it both ways. They wanted the protections, but they also wanted to be able to have editorial policy. This meant that in reality, they were publishers, as they have editorial control. This should never have been the case.
Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action. The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms. We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down.
Facebook is going to focus content filters, which Zuckerberg admits made too many mistakes, on illegal and high severity violations. This should always have been the case. The fact that filters make mistakes is not the issue that Zuckerberg is trying to make it. The problem is that this content that was filtered, predominantly due to not conforming with Facebook's prevailing ideology, was the issue and should never have been the case. So, very late, but at least Zuckerberg has come to this realization.
Fourth, we're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed, so we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive.
Facebook is bringing back what Zuckerberg calls civic content. In other words, politics. He claims people wanted to see less politics, so they stopped recommending these posts. First, politics is essential to a well-functioning society. Second, there are a lot of people that do in fact want to see discussions about politics. So the least that should have happened was reducing recommendations to those who did not engage with political content. The fact that we are in a new era should be utterly irrelevant. While talking about free speech, he continues slipping back into the speech of censorship, or at least editorial decision-making.
Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams.
The moving of Facebook's trust and safety and content moderation teams from California to Texas is an astounding admission of just how ingrained the bias of these groups were, and that it was deeply systemic. I recall where we spoke to Joel Klein, who was then head of New York's education system at a parliamentary hearing in Australia. He noted that some schools had a culture that was so broken that they had to bulldoze the schools and farm the kids out to different schools while a new school was built at another location. There was just no way to fix the school and its culture. This is an admission of exactly that in the case of Facebook. The California team was so incredibly broken, there was no way of fixing it. But this is also a recognition that this is true not only of that specific location, but indeed for all of California, given that they're having to move to Texas.
Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government. And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship. By going after us and other American companies, it has emboldened other governments to go even further. But now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I am excited to take it. It'll take time to get this right, and these are complex systems. They're never going to be perfect. There's also a lot of illegal stuff that we still need to work very hard to remove. But the bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focus primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people voice. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Stay good out there, and more to come soon.
Here Zuckerberg talks of joining with the Trump team fighting for freedom of speech worldwide. This is awesome. Freedom of speech is critical to a well-functioning society. Even in the US, with all of its constitutional protections, there was a significant erosion of these freedoms, most clearly evident with the tech platforms and legacy media. It has gone even further in other parts of the world, where freedoms fought for in World War II have been forgotten, and there's been movement towards Marxism. Paradoxically, it has been Eastern Europe where they have been most recently exposed to the depredations of Marxism, where they are strongest in terms of freedom, and most against what Musk calls the woke mind virus. It genuinely is time to help the citizens of these countries to remove the shackles of Marxist tyranny and be allowed to live their own lives as they see fit. What are your thoughts on these changes? Please let me know in the comments. Yours in freedom, and thanks for watching. Here Zuckerberg talks of joining with the Trump team fighting for freedom of speech worldwide. This is awesome. Freedom of speech is critical to a well-functioning society. Even in the US, with all of its constitutional protections, there was a significant erosion of these freedoms, most clearly evident with the tech platforms and legacy media. It has gone even further in other parts of the world, where freedoms fought for in World War II have been forgotten, and there's been movement towards Marxism. Paradoxically, it has been Eastern Europe where they have been most recently exposed to the depredations of Marxism, where they are strongest in terms of freedom, and most against what Musk calls the woke mind virus. It genuinely is time to help the citizens of these countries to remove the shackles of Marxist tyranny and be allowed to live their own lives as they see fit. What are your thoughts on these changes? Please let me know in the comments. Yours in freedom, and thanks for watching.